They taped off my dock like a crime scene, slapped a neon notice with my name in all caps, and billed me $900,000 because my boat survived a hurricane. And 45 minutes after that room full of neighbors tried to vote me into the poorhouse, I slid 3 old papers across a folding table and watched the HOA president go quiet as a deputy's handcuffs clicked, and I swear to you the whole place felt different the second that metal closed, like somebody finally turned the noise off. I live at Seabrook Landing in North Carolina, the kind of coastal neighborhood that smells like salt and wet rope. After a storm, I'm a marine engineer by trade, not fancy, just stubborn and practical. The kind of guy who tightens things 3 times and keeps a drawer of spare shackles, 'cause you never know. My boat is a 43-foot sloop named Second Wind, a gift from my dad when he sold his roofing business. And the night the storm rolled in, the wind went from a whistle to a freight train. The marina lights blurred into gray curtains and disappeared. And I stood in the dark, listening to lines strain and cleats complain, while the rain hit the windows like pebbles, checking knots, because when the ocean reminds you who's boss, you measure, you tighten, you say a quiet prayer, and you accept you're small. Morning looked like a giant had shaken the docks and set them down. Wrong finger piers, buckled a couple of little center consoles, sunk masts pointing at the sky like spears, and there sat Second Wind at C-17. Rocking easy, a scratch on the fender and a torn sail cover. And I let out a breath. I didn't know I'd been holding. Then heels clicked on wet boards behind me, and here came Paige Merritt with a clipboard held like a shield, and a smile you could slice limes with. "Well, Tyler looks like somebody made out just fine," she said. "Eyes on my boat." And I said it what any decent neighbor would say. "Got lucky. Good prep. Good lines." And that landed like an insult. "Bylaw 12 Section C," she said, tapping the page. "The community can levy an impact equalization fee. When a surviving asset creates structural imbalance, your assessment is $900,000 due in 30 days. And I actually laughed because Bylaw 12 Section C doesn't exist. And she didn't blink. Then you'll appreciate seeing it posted. And she stapled a neon notice near the mailboxes. Big block letters, shouting my name and the number, and folks gathered and read. And some of them gave me that quick little side look that says, "They've already decided who you are." You know what I mean. I went home and covered the dining table in CC&Rs and amendments, sharpened a pencil, and started reading. Engineers don't yell. We measure, and sure enough, there was no magic. Section C, but buried 3 amendments deep, was a clause that let the president hit people with emergency money, without a vote, if it was for structural preservation. And I could feel the shape of the trick she was stretching a rule, like plastic wrap to cover something it was never designed to cover. And by lunch, the embarrassment had spread at the bait shop. Gus suddenly found a lot to reorganize on the gummy worm shelf. My neighbor Bill stared right through me, standing at the notice board, like I was a reflection. And when I walked in the door, my wife Nora was drying a plate she'd already dried twice. "They're talking lean," she said, quiet. And I said, "She can't do that." Nora said softly, "Does that matter if they bleed us in court for years? Maybe we should pay something to make it go away." And I love my wife. She solves things with reason. But fear can dress up like compromise. And I told her paying anything said they were right. And they weren't. The next morning, a man in a too-tight security shirt with HOA compliance stitched in cursive showed up. "Inspection tomorrow at 8, he grunted. "Dock access. Suspended until then. You'll be billed then." He stretched yellow tape across the gate like TV drama. And I stood there, feeling that hot empty in my hands, like I was being dared to step. And that night when I couldn't sleep, I walked to the dockmaster's shed and found Earl Thompson splicing line by lamplight coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. And he listened and finally said, "You're treating this like a rules problem. Rules are wiring diagrams. You want to fix it? Trace the wire back to the main breaker," and that sentence landed like a tool in my palm. I drove inland to the courthouse that smells like wet paper and lemon cleaner, and an elderly clerk named Margaret helped me pull the original plat for Seabrook Landing microfilm humming. And there it was. A master deed conveying the land docks, roads, utilities, and bulkheads to Seabrook Harbor Services, Inc., not the HOA, a separate corporation created to build and manage the marine infrastructure. The HOA came a decade later for paint colors and lawns and trash day subordinate. On purpose, permission to exist, not keys to the house, and tucked in my own property suit. The one I'd skimmed at closing. Because the agent was talking too fast, was a clause transferring shares in Seabrook Harbor Services to the original big parcels, and my lot carried a controlling block. And because nobody had ever bothered to dissolve the company, it was still there. Like a sleeping breaker panel behind a locked door, humming, waiting. And that right there was the twist, the wire I needed to trace. I showed Earl first. His grin came on slow and sure. "You don't need her permission to run your own dock," he said. And next, I sat with Reggie Patel at the fuel dock to $250 for an open sign that wasn't an approved shade of blue, and I laid out the lines that put the pumps and the pier heads under Seabrook Harbor Services, not Paige and her clipboard. "She's been trespassing on your property every time she plays sheriff out here," I said. And he shook his head and said, "Tell me where to sign." And I called the electric contractor, the water company. Sanitation gave them a calm heads up that contracts would reflect Seabrook Harbor Services going forward service, continuous safety audits. Next week, no threats, just steady hands on real levers. And my son Liam mounted 2 little cameras, aimed at the fuel panel and the head of Pier C, not to spy on neighbors, just to have a time-stamped record, because rumor runs fast when fear has a keyboard. Paige felt the ground tilt and doubled down, like bullies do. The HOA blasted emails about community security and reckless modifications and risk to life and property. My phone lit with blocked calls that breathed and hung up. And we came home to T.Y. Kuhn sprayed across the garage in red. And Nora stood in the driveway with tears she tried to swallow. And later she packed a small roller and said, "We are builders. Ty, all this fighting, it's turning us into people we're not. I need some air. I'm going to my sister's for a few days." And she kissed my cheek and left. And the click of the door was loud. And the next morning a courier delivered a court order barring me from Pier C for refusing the HOA's emergency inspection. And I walked to the seawall and looked at second wind, floating gentle. And I heard my dad in my head reminding me that preparation is just love, wearing a tool belt. And I felt something in me go from soft to steel. I packed a leather briefcase with 3 certified copies. The 1902 Master Deed, the Seabrook Harbor Services Charter, and my deed, showing controlling shares. I asked Earl to stand by the community hall breaker cabinet and Reggie to print simple flyers, saying that at 6:30 p.m. dock access would be controlled by Seabrook Harbor Services and HOA fobs would be deactivated, and to see the dockmaster for new passes and Liam set a live stream to a closed community page, because sometimes the only antidote to rumor is a clear picture. The meeting felt like a town hanging chairs, crushed together projector humming Paige at the long table with her secretary, and a slide that read, "Motion to approve special assessment and authorize Leanne. Tyler James. Slip C-17. $4,900,000, and she purred into the mic about shared responsibility and selfish actors. And people nodded because nodding feels like safety, and hands started to rise. And I said, point of order, and she said I had no standing. And I said, this isn't HOA business, it's landlord-tenant. And I placed the 3 documents on the table and slid them toward her, and said the land, docks, roads, and utilities belong to Seabrook Harbor Services, and the HOA has no authority over marine infrastructure and is acting CEO. I'm reviewing their lease effective now, and the room went quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own breath, and somebody coughed, and Paige said, smaller. This is absurd, and I looked at the deputy, and then the room, and said, no one is getting thrown out tonight. But if you've been fined over docks or utilities, those are void. If you paid, we'll audit and fix it. We're putting the wires back where they belong. And I gave Earl a nod, and he flipped the breaker with a heavy clack. Projector head. Mic squeal, gone. Emergency lights glowing soft. A couple gasps, and I said, don't panic, that's me, the owner, taking control of the grid. We're legally responsible for service remains continuous. New key passes with the dockmaster, and you could feel fear. Realize it had been following the wrong leader. And Sarah Bloom, the sailmaker, fined for a work light. After 9, stood up with shaking hands and said, he can't be trespassing if he owns the place. Paige in the room woke up. Grievances poured out overcharges. Surprise inspections. Threats as the deputy watched with his eyebrows up like he'd stumbled into a magic trick where people remember their spine, and Paige grabbed her folder and hissed, this isn't over, and clacked into the night. It wasn't not yet, because around 11 one of Liam's cameras pinged a ghost shape moving in fog at the head of Pier C. A heavy bag, a panel being pried, and Earl got to the gate first because he lives close and moves quiet. And I called 911 and gave the dispatcher my name and the address and a plain description of what was happening, and the deputy from the meeting walked down the planks and said, steady, ma'am, drop the tool and put your hands where I can see them, and the wrench hit the wood with a sound I won't forget. And Paige turned into the light, not a